Hello, and welcome to A Little Room for Healing, where we talk a little about healing, then we do a little healing, and then we talk a little more. I am Joel, and today I have with me John. How you doing, John?
I'm doing great.
Great. Thanks for coming in and hanging out with me.
I'm happy to do this. Yeah.
Amazing. I want to start with some check-ins. Let's check in on how we are feeling right now.
Yeah, I am very excited to be doing this with you. I feel very refreshed from the last couple days, and I am always excited to spend time with you. And we've been talking about this for a couple weeks, and I've been looking forward to it. So it's mostly just a sense of excitement, eager anticipation to see where this goes.
Fun. Yay.
Yeah.
I want to do my check-in, but I want to pose the question, what about the last couple days refreshed you?
Being out of the city for a little bit always feels good to my nervous system. And I've slept really well. I've been around some great friends, you being one of them.
Oh.
And so I think all of those things together have made it a nice time.
Great. Yeah, I can see how that would be refreshing. I feel refreshed hearing you say all that. Okay, I'm going to do a little check-in on myself. How am I feeling right now? I am feeling like I'm still waking up a little bit, even though I've been up for a couple hours. And I am feeling I'm feeling grounded in what we are going to, whatever comes up today. Like your presence is always grounding to me. So I'm definitely tuned into that groundedness. And yeah, I'm just feeling the joy of doing another podcast with a friend, and I've been enjoying these journeys, so I'm excited to see where this one leads us.
That's great.
Yeah. So I would love to talk a little bit about your healing journey, and however far back you want to go to where you are now. I know that it's a huge topic and it might not have enough time for all of it. So let's start and see where it takes us.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess the thing that comes up first for me is that I was raised in what I would look back on and call a very spiritual childhood. My parents both had a really close relationship with God. I was raised in a Christian household. There were a lot of pros and cons to that, but I think one of the benefits I took away from that time in my life was an awareness that diving into the depths of, let's call it like spiritual reality, was the most important thing in life.
What do you mean by spiritual reality?
Yeah, I guess at that time, it was very focused on, the idea of an external God figure, and relationships with people who believed the same things. It was a very the place I'm at now, I would call it a very kind of like conservative container that I was brought up in. But one of my favorite early teachers, Richard Rohr, always said that like having a really maybe small and safe container is a one way of getting a stable childhood. So I definitely feel like I had stability that a lot of other people that I knew didn't. And I always knew that my parents loved me, which was helpful at that time and still is, and then they still do. What I would say as it comes towards healing is I definitely picked up from my mom the sense of an interior life being really important. That's like maybe another more directly to your question, is that she was a very kind of thoughtful and introspective person, and I definitely think passed that on to me. My dad was and is very loving and outgoing. I think I picked up a lot of those traits from him. And then the next main thing I would say that happened was in 2013, I had let's call it like an energetic awakening, that at that time seemingly came out of nowhere, because I didn't really have a framework for that in the tradition I was raised in. So that led me to start exploring sources outside of Christianity for the first time in my life. And I read a lot of yogic texts, Buddhist, Taoist, basically a lot of Eastern spirituality was what started to come to me.
You started doing this at 13?
No, sorry, it was the year 2013.
Oh, 2013. Oh, so my God,
I was
my brain
about
just
23, turning 24.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Why did I? Yeah, you were born in 2000.
It's not the first time somebody
my
took
brain,
that away from that.
My brain heard 13 and didn't hear the 20.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I said it at the time. It felt like it was a spontaneous thing, and I really didn't know what it was. But speaking of 13, I basically, my parents had always, what I would say, been slightly more open-minded than the religious community that I was a part of at the time. So they took me, and I was either 12 or 13 at the time, to a silent retreat with a Trappist monk named Father Thomas Keating, who is known in the Christian world, or maybe the kind of meditation world, as the person who brought a technique called centering prayer, which was his invention, but it really was basically just a revival of the ancient Christian contemplative practices that went back to probably the earliest ones were the years immediately following Christ, with the Desert Fathers and Mothers, who had some issues with the way that Christianity started to become imperialized when it was legalized by the Roman Emperor Constantine in 313. So in the 300s, 400s, 500s, there were a lot of folks in the Christian world who sort of didn't like the way that Christianity was going at the time, in the sense of it being very imperial and warlike, and all the things that the Roman Empire did when it kind of assumed Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. And they didn't really protest, because if you protested against the empire, you'd be killed. So they just sort of quietly did their own thing in the desert and formed these early monasteries, and that's where the early monastic movements of Christianity started. And so in recent times, there was a guy, Thomas Merton, in the 60s, who wrote a lot about contemplative Christianity. And then Thomas Keating was sort of like, I won't say a student of his, but because I don't know if they knew each other. I mean, they might have known each other, but he eventually kind of took some of his writings and his own delving into the early parts of Christianity and came up with this technique called centering prayer, which now, the point I'm at in my life, I would look back and just say is a Christian form of meditation. So I spent time with this man, Father Thomas Keating, at this silent retreat, and learned centering prayer, and something about it really spoke to me, because at the time I started doing it regularly and did it for 10 years. So between whatever it was, 12 or 13, and then 2013, I was doing that. And so now I look back and say, okay, 10 years of meditation will probably makes you more ripe for something like an energetic awakening. That happened to me then.
It definitely did for you.
Yeah. So back to the following this period, is because there was really nothing, like, as much as there is a rich contemplative tradition in Christianity, which not a lot of people know about, there really isn't any teachings or framework for working with, let's call it, like, the energetic dimension of reality. Things that some people might have heard of, like chakras and energy healing, and that a lot more of that is fleshed out in traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, yogic science, those kind of things. So that's what I was led to, and I just kind of devoured that for a number of years, and started working with my own energy in a more conscious way. And that was a period where I would say was really, like, it was very mind opening, because kind of like I said before, the the Christianity framework that I was raised with was very small and very exclusive, in the sense that, like, if you didn't believe certain things or really kind of think a certain way, you know, you weren't, you basically you were going to hell. If you didn't believe in Jesus, you were going to hell, is kind of the most blunt way of saying it. So that period of
Go ahead. Did that have an effect on you?
Yes. So I mentioned earlier that there were a lot of pros and cons to that type of an upbringing. The pros being kind of the stability and the sense of order and kind of like, your place in the world. But it's kind of an early stage. It's an early stage of spirituality, and it's an early stage of life. And the cons of that are having a very narrow way of thinking that didn't just contain itself in the religious sphere. It was kind of how I went about life. I was a very driven, type A kind of person, but that left little room for difference of opinion. I never would have, I was never the kind of person that would vehemently argue against people, but I kind of privately held to my certainties about the world very tightly, and that was one kind of, I would say, detrimental impact that had. And then the psychological implications of believing that if you did something wrong or you didn't quite, fall in line in certain ways, that there would be these kind of eternal consequences to that. And it's not that there's untruth in the sense that your actions have eternal consequences, because I still believe that, but I don't believe it in the same way that I did at the time that I grew up.
I'm curious what the belief is now about eternal consequences.
Yeah, it sounds very like heavy to put it that way, but more just like, the idea of karma is this, that you reap what you sow. I think that's kind of, however you want to put it, whatever word you want to use, like you reap what you sow. It's even in the Bible, is sort of one of those laws of the universe, principles of reality, And so I still believe that, if you do good things in the world, good things will come back to you. But it's not as narrow a lane of what defines good, I guess maybe. It's a more, what I think of as a more expanded sense now, and a holistic one.
So, do you believe in reincarnation? Like, as far as like eternal consequences, do you believe that we are reincarnated, we have multiple lives, and then that karma, some of that karma, maybe that didn't get resolved in one lifetime, it gets carried over into another lifetime?
The framework makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's really tough to talk about these kind of things because I personally don't think it may be as literal as that. I don't have enough experience of that to really say one way or the other. I would say that framework has been helpful to me at times to think about life that way. But I see kind of like, because that's like another belief system, which there's nothing wrong with. I was raised with a belief system, which, was Christianity, and there are tons of belief systems out there. And I think belief systems are sort of like, they're narratives, they're stories we tell ourselves about how the world is and how we are. And I think that can be a helpful one. It has been a helpful one for me at times, but I see belief systems sort of like sets of clothes. Like if you go to a party, you're going to wear a certain outfit. If you play a concert, you're going to wear a different outfit. If you go to, a board meeting, that's a different one. So I like to, at the point that I am in life now, I don't attach myself to any specific belief system too tightly, but I see them as sets of clothes that I would wear psychologically to different functions in my life. And they kind of will suit certain situations.
This is very interesting to me. I am very curious. I'm very curious about this. Is there any worry or fear about being seen as lacking some sort of integrity by putting on different belief system clothing for whatever function you're going to? I guess I'm hearing it as like, put on this, and my projection is to fit into this, but maybe it's, I
actually see what you're talking about, because there is a way that could be done that is very inauthentic, in the sense that you're solely doing that for the purpose of how you appear to other people, in order to fit in or to be accepted, you know. So all of these things, you know, that have like a light side and a dark side in terms of how they can be implemented. You know, I think all spiritual truth, spiritual principles can be, you know, used well and then also misused. So I can see how that could be done that way, but I don't see it that way in myself. I mean, I've gone through a period where I've looked at my people-pleasing tendencies, you know, and it's not that they're gone, but my main motivation in seeing belief systems that way is not primarily now at this point in my life in order to fit in or be accepted by people. It's more a way that works for me to undercut the grasping and clinging to having to know how things are and how the world is. I think that there's so much mystery and so much unknown in the world. And I think a lot of healing is emotionally, psychologically becoming okay with the uncertainty of life. And so I really don't think that anybody really knows everything about life, you know, especially with these really deep things that we're talking about.
I would agree.
Yeah,
with that statement.
Yeah, and so it's more, and maybe at some different point, if we do this interview 10 years from now, I may think that I was an idiot right now. I don't know. I look back at some periods of my life and be like, that was weird, you know. But where I'm at now, I guess what I'm trying to say about it is that it's a way that works for me to not be riddled with the sense of having to have certainty about things, because that's been harmful to me.
You know, when I was asking the question, something was opening up in me after when I started hearing you respond, where it's like, oh, it's not even about integrity and this is what I have to believe and fit in, and this is the way it has to work for me. It's you're open. What I'm hearing from you is that you've just opened yourself to the parts of each parts of possible teachings that will work for you and authentically be of service to you in whatever you're working through or going through.
Yes, but to that, everything you said is true, and I resonate with that, and also of being of service to other people. Because the other analogy that's come to me over the years, aside from like the sets of clothes that you wear, is that all of the different religious traditions of the world are basically just speaking God in different languages. So you can communicate about the world in all of these languages, and there are certain like subtle nuances that you can only say in Portuguese or Spanish that don't quite translate to English. And there are certain things about the character of God, or reality, whatever word you want to use. If people are triggered by God, I get that because I went through that phase too. But you know, the way that the Taoists conceive of reality, and the way that Christians do, and the way that Buddhists do, and the way that Hindus do, all get at a different flavor of what that is. And I find that being multilingual spiritually, it makes me able to connect to people really well. Because if I meet a Buddhist, I can go there. If I meet, you know, a yoga practitioner, I can speak that language too. And then obviously, you know, Christianity was the one I was raised in. That's my English, my home tongue. But I love the fact that there are aspects of the divine that can be articulated better in different languages.
Oh, that's a great answer. I love that. That feels really good. It actually reminds me of my therapist, and I have had conversations about this as well, due to my own background or upbringing in Christianity as well, and some trauma that I experienced and still fight against, and I'm trying to work through. He reminds me that what I believe, and let's say what the denomination that came out of believes of Christianity, is really ultimately pointing to a very similar thing, just with a different story.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
And that's not, and I'm not speaking of like afterlife and heaven and hell. I'm talking about the essence of a higher being or a God, or something that's connecting us all and bringing us all together and wants the best for us.
Yeah, for sure. So I could go back to my story. I was thinking of that in that period that we're kind of talking about here with the expanding beyond Christianity. It was a period that I look back on now and say it was very mind opening, because I had, one of the consequences of that type of religious upbringing, it can be a very narrow minded way of viewing the world. So that was really helpful in that period of my journey to expand my mind and to see basically the perspective that we're kind of talking about now a little bit. And the other thing that happened along with that energetic awakening, that sometimes I call it a Kundalini awakening, only because that was the first thing that I read that gave it a name. So I kind of always come back to that. It was the yogic teachings of Swami Rama of the Himalayas. He was sort of like the first person that I did a lot of reading of, and he, that tradition uses the term Kundalini to describe the energy that moves up the spine. And that was because that was my direct experience of it, was this sense of energy moving up and down my spine. And it was the summer of 2013 when that happened to me one day in meditation. So
what was the emotion that came with it, or feeling, or was there was it awe, was it fear, was it overwhelm, was it excuse me, joy?
It was well, the experience at that time was very blissful. So it was a lot of like joy. There was a lot of like confusion, kind of a little bit, and I guess awe is a good word, kind of like wondering at what was going on, curiosity. I don't remember too much fear about it at the time, but it was mostly just this insatiable curiosity to figure out what it was. That was like my early response, like, what is this, And I was just voraciously reading all of this stuff that gave me some sense of it. And the more I would read and be like finding the what was confirming my experience, it was very validating to see that, there were like other people have talked about this is a thing, that exists. And that was also partly what started to undo the small framework that I was presented with growing up, was because if there's this thing that's actually happening to me, that's like in my experience, that is not talked about in the Bible, that's, nothing was mentioned here, then it's like, well, I can't go against my own experience. Like, and unfortunately, a lot of, religion teaches you to go against your own experience.
It does.
And that was the beginning of me going on a journey to actually learn to trust my own experience and have that be a really primary source in my life. And back to Richard Rohr, he has another great framework. I always say that Richard Rohr kind of saved Christianity for me, because he still remains a Franciscan friar, but the way that he talks about that tradition is very open and expansive and inclusive, and I really have stayed connected to that and really appreciated him. But he has a framework where he conceives of our knowing, or epistemology would be the fancy word, like the way we know the world, as like a tricycle, and there's 3 wheels, and the first wheel is your inner experience, and then there's also the sacred scriptures of whatever tradition you're talking about, and then there's the tradition itself, the actual like extra scriptural stuff that goes along with the religion. And he's like, a true rounded spiritual tradition should value all 3 of them. And so, because some people, like the thing with, if you just rely on your own experience alone, that can lead you down some pretty crazy rabbit holes. People have these profound experiences in meditation or ceremony, and then they come back and they think they're the Messiah, So if you're just in your own experience in your own private world, and you don't have a community to reflect back to you, you don't have a history to refer back to at all, then you can kind of go to some weird places with just experience. But if you lead with experience, because he conceives of that as like the front wheel of the tricycle, then, but you also can kind of ground it in a sense of community and a religious text or other religious texts, that gives you a much more well-rounded framework for kind of trying to figure out what reality is and orient your way through life. So the other thing that came along with that Kundalini awakening was what I would call a really deep somatic process that started to happen. So aside from me feeling the energy moving in my spine, the next months and years involved a lot of just random and sometimes weird physical movements that my body would just intuitively start doing. So it would happen at various points in life, but it was never to the point that it felt uncontrollable. But if I allowed myself to just relax and lay down or go into meditation, my body would start moving in ways that it never had before. And that was the part when those things happening, then I started, it was like, I wouldn't say like fear might be too strong a word, but I was kind of like, because some of it was very bizarre and very like, you know, these like, it felt like contortions and jerking and stuff. It wasn't always comfortable. I would never describe it really as painful, but it felt like a lot of like effort. And now with some of the stuff I've learned about this and talking with other people, it's basically, I see it as the body releasing stress, releasing trauma in a physical way. And I was also a very disembodied person, I would say, for the first 23 years of my life. Very head-driven, very intellectual. You know, it's probably most of our culture could relate to that.
Yeah.
And so
I gotta say, I've been a pretty disembodied person for much longer than the first 23 years of my life. So kudos to you for getting started early.
Yeah, it's I'm grateful that it showed it to me. It wasn't an easy path because, you know, the sensations that we repress and get stored in our body are very uncomfortable. You know, and that period was it's you know, it's still ongoing, but that early period was just realizing that a lot of the stuff that comes out of the body in that period is not pleasant.
Yeah.
It didn't really get to a very deep like emotional level yet, because that was going to come later, but this period was very physical and it was very mental. It was expanding my mind and it was putting me back in my body, and it was showing me how my body was actually feeling and how it felt in my life as it moved through the world around certain people in certain communities. And I started to, you know, learn experientially that phrase that people use, like the intelligence of the body. Like it was another source of knowing. It was another way to gather information from your reality. And I was learning that through that period.
And by that, you mean some people that, like, your body was telling you that some people that you were around weren't, your body wasn't feeling safe. And then some people, you're like, oh, wow, it feels really good to be here and really safe.
Yes. Yeah, and safe and unsafe in certain circumstances was what it was. And sometimes it was more subtle in the sense of just like, I get energized by being around this person and I feel a little drained being around this person. It wasn't like I'm unsafe and I want to run away, but just, or doing this activity feels like it's giving me energy. And this activity feels like it's draining me, you know, and it's like so that started to reveal itself to me, you know.
That's another thing that I've been working on a lot with my therapist, but also in the other healing work that I do, personal healing work that I do, is following what is easeful in the body. And I've always in the past tried to it felt like I've forced my way into something that I thought I wanted, even though the body and the energies around me were resisting it, and I'm like getting frustrated. And then when I hit something that feels easeful and the body's relaxed and calm, that feels really, really good. And that's what I keep saying. That's what you follow. That's what you follow, Joel. But I've been so used to in the past with the discomfort that I think that's normal, and that's what I'm supposed to be in, is the discomfort. But really, what I want to be in and learn to be in comfortably is the comfort, the ease. That's
great. Yeah, and it makes me think of this. I forget where I heard this, but you know, everybody's heard who's a meditator has heard the phrase the monkey mind. It's one of those things of like, you know, people try to sit down and meditate and their mind is just a gazillion places, and that's everybody's first experience of meditation. But it's actually the monkey body that's causing the monkey mind.
Oh, wow.
So it's all this stuff that's in our bodies that is like uncomfortable, that expresses itself as thoughts that are scattered. And the word you used before was easeful, and the way I experience that, or the word I would use for myself, is just when I'm in that place, there's just this inner quiet that happens. That my body feels at rest, but then that usually expresses itself as then a quieter mind than what I'm used to. And those two things go hand in hand, and that was, you know, another level of how the connection between the somatic and the mind was showing itself during that period. Because for me, my earliest experiences of meditation were very helpful, but they were very mental. It was very like, you know, you control your mind, and you know, as I understand meditation now, it's not really about controlling your mind. It's more about witnessing and stuff. But that early period, that's the way it expressed itself. It was a very kind of like rigid, controlling, mental way to meditate, which was how I had to start. But then as I got into my body again, I could see the dimension, the connection between those two, and that a uncomfortable mind or a scattered mind was very often the result of a body that felt knotted up and tight and constricted.
Yeah. Yes. Oh man. I haven't heard the phrase monkey body before, and what you're saying is landing so hard with me of past thought loops and thought loops and thought loops, and I'm in those thought loops because I was actually afraid of being in my body, because my body was the word that's coming is untamed, but I don't want to tame it. It's just I was afraid of it. I was afraid of all the feelings that were in it, all the sensations that were going on in there. So I went into the head and I just thought looped over and over again instead of breathing and just letting what was happening in my body move and experience. But if you're not used to doing that and you haven't done that for 30 years of your life, 35 years of your life, it takes a lot of time because there's a lot of pent up, built up expression in there that is too much to do at once. You have to titrate it.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And that would bring me, I think, to my most recent third, I guess you can call it third phase of my spiritual path, which I call the phase of the heart. And that's where medicine work came in. And it was a long period of time that I had, when I was kind of reading into these other modalities, you know, the somatic stuff, the other world traditions, that the mention of people's experience with psychedelics came up. It came up as, you know, I heard it referenced early on as a very powerful somatic tool, something that helps people get back in their bodies. The one, which was really interesting, the one part of the world that I never really delved too deeply into during that period when I was, you know, broadening my horizons, was the indigenous world. That didn't come to me yet. And so, but what did come through was this sort of like, and I can actually even go back all the way to high school, when I was, my earliest experiences of music, one of my favorite periods of music was the 60s and classic rock. That was just something I loved as a teenager. But it wasn't just the music, it was the whole culture of the time. It was the, you know, the revolutionary spirit of the 60s and the counterculture movement and all those kind of things. There was just something about that always drew me. And obviously one of the biggest drivers of that was the discovery, or I would say rediscovery, you know, maybe discovery for the Western world, of psychedelics. And, you know, like anything, there's a double-edged sword. There was a lot of like craziness that happened as a result of that. I feel like it's almost like we're an adolescent species, and we discover this powerful technology without the container that it really came from, which was the indigenous world. And then, you know, people went crazy. You know, some people went crazy, and other people found God. You know, and it was just mattered. There were a lot of variables that determined, like, you know, which way you went with that. But there was something. It was like a fire that lit, and we didn't really know how to control the fire at that point. And but I increasingly found more and more people coming into my sphere who were mentioning these positive experiences they had with psychedelics, but they weren't really using them to party, which, again, I don't have anything against. I've done that at times. It's fun. But specifically honing their use for a healing journey. And that was something that clarified itself over time for me. And I started to get curious, and I would try to then actively seek out people who told their stories about that. And it kept coming. And then eventually, the way it happened in my life was 2020, right during the pandemic. That was a period of my life which it's funny to say now, but I met more people during the pandemic than I had the previous like 20 years before my life. Like I've had really great groups of friends that I've kept in touch with over the years that I'm really grateful for. Like I had a really close group of high school friends who I, you know, went to all their weddings. You know, they all have kids now, and I still go see them and stuff. I have a really great group of college friends, fellow music majors, who, you know, we still gig together, you know, at various points, or you know, hang out and do a Friendsgiving and stuff. But I hadn't really made new friends after college for a long time. 2020, I would have been 29 or 30, and during the pandemic, I started meeting all these people through a kava bar in the city. And it became this hub of connection, and ended up meeting this amazing group of people that I'm in touch with, some of them still, but we call ourselves Sacred Convergence. That was the name we gave. It was just this happening of people who all were at this place in this one time in the pandemic, trying to stay sane at a crazy time. And they were a lot of artists, a lot of rebels, a lot of and in that community, I ended up finding psychedelics, and then through connections that were made there, ended up at my first ayahuasca ceremony in May of 2021.
Amazing.
And that process of getting into the medicine world, and that what I would say really went down the path of the heart for me, and really healing the emotional part of my being. And I really see now that emotions are sort of like the link between the head and the body. So those two phases that I had been before were kind of working on their own front, but they were a little bit not quite aligning, and they really needed to center through that axis of the heart in order to come into full alignment. And it wasn't easy. It still is not an easy journey, but the awareness of my emotional dimension of my being has never been stronger, or I would still say it's in the forefront. And that is where I would situate myself now in this present moment, is all three being kind of important and relevant, but the emphasis is on the heart.
I love the idea of the heart being the link between the body and the mind. And I never heard of the emotions being the link. I hadn't heard that before. So that's something I'm going to sit with for a time after this. I feel like this is a great place to transition into your healing session.
Sure.
And are you interested in Reiki or 13th octave La Ho Chi?
Do I have to pick?
Yes.
Okay. I would say then 13th octave La Ho Chi.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
And one of the great things about 13th octave La Ho Chi is that it is a connector between, it's like a recentering of the divine in us and a reconnection to the divine. So it's also a link. So just as we're talking about the heart linking the body and the mind, this session may just link you and the divine again in a more solid way. Do you have any intentions for this session?
Well, the reason I felt drawn to that is I've received many Reiki sessions, but I've heard of 13th octave La Ho Chi before, but never had a formal session with that. I've had some energy work from you before here and there, but not a full dedicated session. So that's what most intrigues me about it. But in terms of intentions right now, I would say I'm in the midst of a pretty big life transition right now, and clarity on what to do next, clearing out any of the emotional debris that I am experiencing through this transition, I would say is probably what's most alive in my life right now.
Great. Intention set. Let's do it then. We will be back after John's healing session.
Awesome.
And we're back from John's 13th octave La Ho Chi session. You want to check in? How are you feeling now?
I'm feeling amazing. Really relaxed on a physical level, and very much present in my body. That quiet body and quiet mind that we were just talking about before we took the break is what I'm feeling right now. And I was really struck by on the energetic level, I definitely felt a lot of what was going on, and it felt different from Reiki, different quality to the energy. I appreciated the connection to the archangels, and that in the prayer in the beginning about like the Holy Spirit and God, that was the language of my, the tradition I was raised in.
Yeah, I was thinking that when I was reading it, I was like, oh wow, this might hit home here.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a very gentle movement of the energy and clearing that I felt in my body, and very unique. It definitely felt like its own flavor, and I'm very much enjoying the state that I'm in right now.
You appear very calm and relaxed, and I can hear it in your voice as well. When you say you could feel what was going on energetically, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it felt like an opening that allowed the energy to flow more easily, but it didn't have any edges or jerkiness to it. Sometimes when I'm journeying or even doing some energy work on myself, it can feel very activating and like it's clearing stuff in a kind of powerful way. And it's not that it's not powerful, but it doesn't feel, the intensity is very low, but I feel like the depth that it's going to, it's facilitated by the relaxation that I feel in my body.
As far as your intentions go, is there any sense of movement or having met those?
Yeah, I felt a really kind of deep confirmation that I made the right decision in the direction that I need to go in for this next phase of my life. And yeah, so the clarity on that felt really nice. And another thing that came to me was what we were talking about before, about orienting our way through life by what makes our body feel good and safe. And that feels like the compass by which I'm guiding myself, even in this specific decision. And so it was another way of confirming it and kind of elucidating why or how I'm going about making those decisions.
Wondering if you're open to talking about where exactly, what direction you're talking about.
Yeah, I just have recently ended a relationship that I was in, a long relationship, almost 3 years. And it was kind of near the end of it. It was just kind of both of us weren't really feeling safe and comfortable around each other. So that, and we were trying really hard to make it work, but it felt exactly like what you were describing, where you're like, you had an idea of what you wanted to do and you were trying to like force yourself into something, but your body was just being like, no. So so basically all parts weren't aligned. There were parts that were in it and there were parts that were out, but that's kind of, and now moving forward in my life now, I'm just noticing how my body feels and how the energy feels in me, and what I'm imagining, where I'm imagining my life will go from here, and that's kind of the place that I'm in.
Where are you imagining your life going from here?
Well, the thing that feels most exciting is me pursuing my healing journey, but the phase that it's in right now is, I think, placing a big emphasis on me holding space for other people now and helping other people heal. And that's what feels most exciting for me to do. It doesn't feel like work. And it feels like the natural overflow of having filled up my cup this much, that then the next phase for me to grow personally is to learn how to help other people, but then that also benefits the other people too. So I just feel like my circle is widening. For that long period, maybe 8 or 10 years following the awakening, it was very much self-focused, and it needed to be. It's that was where I was putting my energy, and it's where it needed to go, and it bore a lot of fruit, and it laid a lot of foundation for where I'm at now. But now it feels like my circle of compassion is expanding to include more and more people. And that started with meeting a community, and but then now having started, maybe it's almost coming up on about a year that I've been doing this work for other people, and it feels like that is the thing that I'm most excited about and where I see my life going further towards.
I'm wondering if you agree with me in this. I've found that in the role of helping others learn how to navigate their healing journey and how to take care of themselves, that I have come across much richer healing of my own for myself. Is that something that you've been experiencing in the last year?
Yes. Yeah. It's to me, the way that I know that it's sustainable is because the helping of other people is helping myself. I think there can be an imbalance on both sides, in the sense that people can be too self-focused, like everything is about their own healing process, and then there are people that can be too giving, in the sense that they're not giving from a full cup, but they're giving from some kind of a need to feel important or feel special to people. But the only sustainable one in the long run feels like the one that when you nourish other people, it nourishes you. And if one of those is off, then yeah. So that's one of the reasons that I feel, because I was coming from the orientation of naturally being more of an introvert, more kind of self-focused on my path for a long period of time, the fact that the offering of help to other people is continuing to nourish my own path is showing me that they're both the giving of others is coming from a fuller place, and feels like it can be something that's sustainable.
Yeah. In what ways are you now holding space for others?
I am doing guided one-on-one journeys. I'm doing integration coaching, and I'm doing energy work. Those are kind of the three main ones. And also group retreats.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
What's the energy work that you're doing?
So I've studied Reiki, did level 1, 2, and master. So that's my primary form of energy work. But also as much as I value, La Ho Chi is a different modality that I'm not trained in, but as much as all these different modalities have their power, they also, to me, all seem like different languages of the same. It's all energy. It's all the same energy that people are working with to some extent, So a lot of the energy work that I do also is very intuitive, and it kind of flows out of that energetic awakening that I had and my own experience of that in my body, and so Reiki was the modality that I happened to study, but then a lot of times when I'm working on people, it's very based on them and in the moment as well.
Yeah, I can totally relate to you on the intuitive part of it, especially when I'm working with Reiki. It hasn't happened so much when I'm doing La Ho Chi as of yet, but when I'm working with Reiki, there's a lot of intuition that comes into play that I find myself grounded in the Reiki energy, and that's the basis of what's happening, but hearing guidance to try this and try something different, or do this, or put your hand here and make this motion, and I'm finding that opening up to those intuitions and that guidance is making the healing much more, I keep coming to the word rich, like not my healing being rich, but the healing that's happening for the person, and I find that to be incredible, and I am in awe every time that happens, and then the response that comes from the person receiving, I'm just in awe every time. Like, wow, that whatever the voice or the knowing or the message or anything that tells me to do something, or asks me to do, invites me to do something, when you listen to that and follow it, it's really incredible what can come of it. And I feel like that actually matches with what we're saying about following what feels easeful.
Mm-hmm. And also the thread on learning to trust yourself and your own experience.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and the thing that was coming to me as you were saying that was, you know, I went to school for music and have been a professional musician for 20 years. And the idea about in music where you learn the basics, you learn how to read music, you learn music theory, and then eventually that enables you to make your own music, whether it's improvisation or composition.
Right.
It's the same type of thing where like there is an important phase where you study the modality and you learn the quote unquote rules around something, but then once that foundation is there, then learning how to add to that from your own creativity is like the next step.
I love that. I love that analogy. I did not study music as much as you did, but I did play some, and I skipped the learning all of the stuff about it and just went into what sounds good to me.
Yeah.
But it was limited because I didn't have I played guitar and I didn't really learn the scales, so it was limited in what I could do.
Yeah. Another thread that reminds me of is just now the idea that in healing, especially specifically ceremonial circles, the music is such a big part of the healing as well, and how it's always felt to me sort of like a dual thing where there are certain ikaros, let's say in an ayahuasca ceremony, that you learn, but then at the same time, it's not like the words are somehow magical. It's like your energy and your being has to embody that as well. So there has to be the direct living connection that you have to the source of where that sound is coming from.
Right.
And you have to sing the right song, you know? So it's that there's like that balance again too of like, some people are just like, I got a calling for the medicine and I'm going to serve. But then like studying is important too, you know, whether it's music or ceremony or anything. And then there are some people that are just like, you know, I went to school for this for 8 years and I learned all the rules, but it's like very rigid and they're not actually like embodying the teachings. And the people who have both are the people that I find myself drawn to.
Yeah. I think that's the same for me as well. That might be why I'm friends with you. You have a nice balancing of that. You're very knowledgeable, and you're also using that knowledge to expand on it in what feels authentic and true to you. I'm very drawn to that. Not only as someone who like can learn from you, but also as someone who can collaborate with you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's nice to hear. I
have this desire to go deeper into feelings with you.
Sure.
And I like the desire is there, and I'm noticing that the way in is not presenting itself.
I have an idea.
Give it to me.
If you're open to it. Where we left the conversation off before we broke for the healing session was around moving into the path of the heart.
Yeah.
Kind of like where I was in my journey. And it's interesting that it was at that point that I sort of met you and started doing a lot of this work. And I would love to talk more about like that part of my path. Yeah. And maybe if that brings up stuff for you around emotions, because that's just been my world for the last 3 years. We could kind of riff on that.
Please. I love this idea.
Yeah. So there was this powerful connection between starting to work with medicine and ceremony and then opening up to my feelings. and it was almost like one of the most common early experiences that I had was I had all these memories of stuff that had happened to me, and there was sort of this like intellectual assent to the idea that these impacted me. But what was missing was like the actual feeling of it. So trying to think if I can use an example to illustrate this, but like just things, let's say that kids at school said. You know, I wasn't particularly bullied. I happened to have a good group of friends and stuff, but there were just stuff that kids say to each other when they're, 11, 12, 13. And I remember that I would look back on that and I would be like, I guess that wasn't the nicest thing that you could have said to somebody. But then I would have these experiences, especially early on. I can do this kind of now in my, normal baseline state of being with myself. But the work with the medicine, I was able to really feel the impact and relive it in a way that wasn't just me. It's almost like being back in the experience versus like looking at it from like a third person perspective. And I notice when I have memories from childhood, a lot of it is not the actual memory because I'm seeing me in the memory. And I remember somebody reading something somewhere early on that like if you're having a memory but you're seeing yourself, it's not actually the memory that happened because you would have been seeing the thing out of your own eyes. And so there was that was how I remembered a lot of things from my childhood. But then to have the experience of actually going back into it was almost like that bird's eye view was like a visual dissociation, visual representation of the dissociation from actually being in my body and being in the emotions of the moment. So those experiences, I was able to go back to them, and it felt like actually being back, not literally in the experience, but in my emotions of the experience enough. And that repeated process of that enough, showed me that there were all these layers of feeling that I had not actually either been present for at the time, or it wasn't present in me now enough for me to get in touch with what it was like to have that experience happen to me.
Yes. That is bringing up something in me of an experience I had while I was working with medicine myself. And if you're open to hearing it.
Yes, sure.
When I was 23, I had this emergency room visit that was very traumatic. I grew up with a urethra that had, and I did not know this until I was 23 as well, until after this emergency trauma, but that had false passages in it. So when I would urinate, the urine would go into these false passages in my urethra instead of out, and this sharp pain would come into the tip of my penis. And I just hid it my whole life because I was so unbelievably embarrassed by it, and so much shame around it. And there's a whole lot of things about it that I could go into, but I'll get to the story. So one night I couldn't pee at all, and I went in and did this emergency room visit, and it was really intense. And the doctors were so impersonal. They're like very robotic, and they're doing their work and trying to put a catheter in. It didn't go up all the way. Very painful. It got bloody in there. They couldn't see anymore. They had to do a suprapubic catheter through my abdomen. And it was also impersonal. And it was terrifying. And it was painful. And it was like in this really sensitive, vulnerable place in my body. And I would be carrying that, not only the pain of the urination, but also from up to 23, but then the pain of that emergency room. I didn't realize how in my body it was pain. I was holding the pain, how deep in my body. And then I was doing some work with medicine one night, and I went back to the emergency room, and I was on the table again, and I was re-experiencing it. And this time, instead of the doctors, the robot, it started with the robotic doctors there, and I was like feeling how terrified I was and how scared my body was, and how like there was no emotional connection between the two of us, and nobody was holding me in like the extreme fear and pain that I was in. And I re-experienced that, and then it shifted, and the doctors were gone, and it was just me and my friend in the room. And as I was going through the procedure, my friend was in there, and he was the only one in there, and it was just, I was just filled with like I was being held, and I was being filled with love while it was happening, and realized that how much I needed that in this situation, and like getting it in that moment through the medicine was beyond a doubt one of the most healing experiences of my journey with my urethra that I've ever had. And so that's what it reminded me of when you told me what you just said about your memories.
Yeah, well, that is intense. And what that reminds me of is how trauma isn't the thing that happens to you, it's the lack of the resources around processing the thing that happened to you that you had. And so it was almost like you experienced the same thing in your life in the past and in the journey, but in one you didn't have the emotional support, and in the other one you had the emotional support to process the event. And that's really to me what healing is. It's not the absence of pain or doing some magic thing that makes the pain go away. It's actually just having the resources in yourself and around you in a community of other people to help you go through the experiences and feel held. And that's the catharsis that brings.
So much of trauma is an event happens or a situation happens, and then if it happens to be an interaction between you and, say, a parent when you're a kid, if there's no repair after the event happens, and there's no, what you're calling like the holding or the emotional connection or availability, then that's what the trauma is. That the fact that it didn't get repaired, it's just hanging there in the void, and you're frozen in that state.
Yeah, and I think another big part of my path is accepting. Like people present this model of like big T trauma and little T trauma, and big T trauma would be like things like abuse, violence, severe accidents and things like that. And little T traumas are just not having. They're harder to see. They're still trauma, but they're on a smaller scale. And what I was thinking of as you were saying that is part of my path has been learning to deal with some big T traumas, but also to actually take the little T traumas much more seriously than I was, because on a certain level, that what you were just describing of that repair afterwards, so many people didn't have that in pre-verbal stages of development, like the process of being born, co-regulation of being with a mother, with breastfeeding, with certain things that like are what we all need at the early stages were not given to us. And then we actually don't learn what a regulated nervous system feels like at all. And we have no model of that. And then we go through our lives thinking that whatever we're feeling is normal and a baseline. And the reason why I think healing work is so relevant for everybody is because everybody has some of that. And it's hard. There's an early part of the journey which involves actually accepting that you have trauma. And that can be very hard for people because a lot of it is invisible. It's what you didn't get. And it's much easier to be like, this person did this to me, but not everybody has that story. So it's harder to see. And the other thing is it's like traumas of omission. The stuff that you didn't get, the stuff that you didn't receive, you didn't even know that you could receive it, and there's just there's no way to know. It's like it's the unknown unknowns is another way of saying it. You don't know what it is that you don't have. But for a lot of people, there's just this gnawing sense of like, is this it? Is this how I have to feel all the time? Like there has to be something better than this, and that I think honoring that inner experience that a lot of people have can lead them to actually start to look for the things that they didn't have and then move forward on their path.
Speaking of moving forward on your path, what you were talking about before, about your memories and about when you started working with the medicine and you started re-experiencing the feelings, is this something that you're able to do without the medicines now?
Yes. Yeah.
And was it a journey to learn how to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it was that's how I really resonate with referring to these things as medicines, because medicine is something that helps you heal, but the body is its own healing intelligence. I've seen that now, and the medicines just sort of remind the body in a very somatic way how to do that healing, because it's basically received an opposite pattern for so long. So the medicine to me restores my awareness and my sensitivity to things that are subtler than let's say most people would pay attention to, or even were taught how to pay attention to. And opening up that sensitivity, like I was saying before, in the early stages involves a lot of pain, because a lot of the stuff that we've repressed is not pleasant. But once we get through a good chunk of that, because it never ends, because it's a lifelong work, but when we get through a good chunk of that, we are left with this open channel and this kind of sensitivity to the world that wasn't there before. And so that becomes a permanent state slowly. You kind of increase your baseline level of sensitivity, and then that enables you to do a lot of work that, let's say, in the beginning of your path, or the beginning of your medicine path, you can only access in other states of consciousness. You're able to enter those other states of consciousness yourself through your own practice.
Yeah.
And that is one of my favorite things to notice when that happens, or when there's like an up leveling of some kind of awareness or sensitivity in me, and to appreciate that that work and that ability to go there has been like unlocked in me, and is stable.
Yeah. I love celebration along the way, and being able to notice those subtle shifts and the quote unquote upgrades in noticing and being able to be with what's going on in ourselves. I'm so happy that journey, that's where you've gotten in that journey, that you are able to notice those subtle things.
I think what also contributed to that for me too is because I did a lot of medicine work in a short period of time, and I think what helped me be able to do that was the fact that I had meditated consistently for 20 years before I ever took a psychedelic in my life. So that gave me a container to hold my experience, and already chipping away at the increasing of sensitivity and awareness, that then medicine felt like it just was an accelerator of a process that had already begun. It wasn't some radically new thing. I even remember the first ceremony that I experienced, and I'm sure a lot of people have this experience, but it felt like coming home. It felt like I had been here before, even though I had never done medicine before. It brought me to a familiar place to a certain extent, and that familiar place was that the deeper layer of my being, and that's there for everybody. And I had been searching for that for my whole life up to that point, and it just was like peeling back the veil that was between my ordinary, level of consciousness that I moved through the world in, and then that place you go to. But there was a familiarity there.
Yeah. You call it, in your experience, peeling back of the veil, and in my experience, it was, for me, moving boulders of blockages that were preventing me from seeing, and really connecting with that depth in me, where the truth, it feels like where the truth lies.
Yeah, that to me, that speaks of like the somatic language, like in the body, the perception is that there are these big, heavy blockages, heaviness, stuckness, density, like all of those kind of things, and then the kind of hard to put into words process of how medicine undoes those blockages, and even things like energy work, that we just experienced, all contribute to that, and that the other side of that is a greater sense of presence and aliveness than we have had before that.
Yeah. And what's really wild is that there's no end to the depth. And I'm continually clearing blockages and seeing more and going, holy cow, there's more to this? There's more to this?
That's because that's like, we were saying before that the unknown is something that people have a lot of fear of, and kind of like learning to be okay with the uncertainty of life is one of the things that I see the healing path as. The other thing that the human being has a very difficult time relating to is infinity. So when you say that there is no end to this, we're talking about an infinite process. And that's another thing that I actually remember childhood fears of. This is really interesting. Like, I had fears of the vastness of everything, the world, God, the universe, and you could use the word infinity for that. And there was something about that was really scary. But I think that there is a level of our being that actually finds that nourishing, and like that's home, to be in the eternal or the infinite.
It feels like this is bringing it back to something in the beginning you said about not necessarily eternal, it wasn't punishment they used. It was like, what was the word?
Well, it was. I mean, if the model I was presented with was if you didn't believe in Jesus, you were going to hell.
Eternal consequences.
And hell is defined as this eternal place of punishment. Yeah, I don't know where you were going with that, but it's almost like a flip of like it's an eternal moving deeper into love and into expansion.
Yeah, well, in some ways, because I was brought up in a Lutheran environment, and I also have experienced the teachings of eternal punishment and then heaven as well. And then what I'm gathering in my own exploration of things is that hell isn't a place after death that you get eternally punished. Hell is actually the disconnection that we feel with ourselves due to trauma and due to blockages and stuff that we are talking about moving and getting into the depth of us. And the depth of us is closer to God. And so when we keep doing that, that's the eternal, that's the God, that's the heaven. And it's not something that happens after life, after death. I mean, it's something that is continuously we're continuously working towards.
Yeah, I was taught that later on, like heaven and hell are present states. They're not future states. And even some of the Christian teachings talk about how, I forget which mystic this was, but they basically said it's heaven all the way to heaven and it's hell all the way to hell. So that still like has a model where those two exist, but the point of that is that it's in this moment. And if we're talking about eternity is the eternal present. So that means in this moment is contained the full potentialities of all the way through to the lowest suffering and all the way to the highest joy. And that we're able to actually access that now and move forward in that same direction based on that was what was bringing me back to the idea that I still believe in eternal consequences, is that every choice we make in the present moment can move us in one of those two directions. And there has to at least be the option for that if such a thing as free will does actually exist, which it apparently does to most of us, so
who doesn't it exist for?
I can't really speak so much from experience when it comes to this, but I've read some really great masters talk about how they don't believe in choice anymore. And I don't really, I've gotten glimpses of a state of consciousness in which everything is happening and there's no one really there doing anything. Everything is being done. And I'm curious to experience that more and to go deeper into that, but just taking it off of the experience of people who I've read that feel like they're not crazy or lying, that they're actually embodying a state in which they are so identified with the totality of everything that it doesn't feel like there actually is a separate sense of self that is choosing anything anymore.
Well, yes, we'll have to look into that and then come back and do another podcast about that topic right there.
That could be its own its own show.
Well, this has been great, and it was really a joy to sit and talk with you and to hear more about your journey and to offer you some healing from me and to get to learn a little bit. I got to learn.
It's been a joy for me too. I was really looking forward to this. I think I'm so excited for you in doing this, because this feels like it's such an aligned thing for you in one sense of bringing together all the skills and abilities that you've acquired over your life and putting it into kind of like one project. I personally have loved podcasts. It's been my preferred method of learning over the last 10 years.
Oh, cool.
So to see you do that and to kind of like step into your gifts, and just the format I think is great. I just love this idea of like having a conversation and then a healing session and then the other conversation. It's not to mention that it's just like I get a free healing session. Like, this is great, But then to like orient the conversation as bookends around that, I think is also great, awesome and unique.
Cool.
So
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you for being here. And an invitation to all of you out there to make a little room for healing in your life. You never know where it's going to take you. Could be to heaven. And we'll see you next time.